Well, good morning and happy Tuesday, everyone. My name is Cheryl Cohen. I'm the Housing Division Administrator with Montana Housing with the Department of Commerce, and really want to welcome all of you to the Montana Housing Partnership Conference, our virtual conference for 2021. We are so excited that you have joined us for this year's conference. This is our second year doing a virtual conference, and we hope that you find it engaging, informative, and inspiring. To start the conference, I would like to welcome Daniel Pocha from the Little Shell Tribe to share some words with us about the importance of home. Daniel?
Good morning, and thank you for having me. As you said, I'm a member of the Little Shell Tribe, and it was an honor to be asked. And if this was a native gathering, one of the first things we would do would probably thank the Creator for such a beautiful day and allowing us to come together and asking Him to give us a good forethought, maybe our forethought as good as our hindsight, so that you guys can move on with the day and do some great things. But it's a real honor to be asked to talk to you this morning and share a little bit of the history of the Little Shell and the things we were doing. The Little Shell Tribe of Montana actually originated in Red River country that bordered the woodlands between the Minnesota and the plains. And we, as being the most western of that thing, moved to Montana. And, for 157 years, we fought with the federal government to get federal recognition. And with this, we never, ever acquired a reservation when we finally got our recognition. But we were denied that by the federal government, and it created us being landless Indians. And we were forced to travel wherever you could, because you had to, all natives were to be on a reservation, and if you weren't allowed on the reservation by them, you had no place to shelter. So many of our tribe members spent their lifetime living in places like Moccasin Flats, where they would be close to a city dump on a slaughterhouse to where they could scavenge, make a living. And when the 10-cent treaty come about, it really put the nail in our coffins for hoping for federal recognition. We became the landless Indians of Montana. We spent the next, that was in 1892, I believe, and the rest right up to our recognition, just trying to force the federal government to recognize us. So we lived in abstract poverty. Blackjack Persian and his Buffalo Soldier would actually do winter roundups and remove natives from the land that were off reservation. And then there was a Cree Deportation Act that the federal government passed once that declared all natives in Montana or the Northern Plains to be Cree, which was a Canadian Indian. So they would load us on cattle cars where we would be just dumped with no resources at all. But when they ran out of money for that, they would do these winter roundups, and they would just find our people in winter camp and burn all their possessions and stuff. So it just led to poverty and a lack of resources. My family was very lucky that after the demise of the buffalo, we were able to homestead my great grandfather on the Dearborn River near Lake Bean, and we were able to hold the swine until they moved into Gilman, which is next to Augusta, in about 1918. So we ended up with some assets that most of our tribal members that didn't have. So we were quite fortunate in that. And this battle went on until December 20th of 2019, when we were finally recognized by the federal government. And that was a great day. And it brought to light to me that we were finally recognized on the shortest day of the year. And rather than hold in my heart all of the stuff I had suffered and my people had suffered through the years, was to remember that every day moving forward would be a new and longer day. So now with the time to try to build a nation. And we have moved forward with that. But unfortunately, with this pandemic, it has treated us, it has put us all in isolation away from it. But the tribe has gained some resources. So in the next couple of months, we're going to open our own medical clinic. And we were able to acquire funding through HUD to help with rental assistance for our people. Now, basically, it started with first in Great Falls and some of the highlights. But with this last round of funding, now we can do that statewide to all tribal members. Because I believe the three things that are basic to all people is food, safe, not safe, but affordable and good health care, and affordable housing that's safe and secure. And on a personal note, I've always advocated for Native Americans. And about 20 years ago, I as on the board of the Helen Indian Alliance. I joined the board of Rocky Mountain Development. So in that course of 20 years, I've had the great honor and pleasure of watching us bring almost, I think, 380 housing units, either built or rehab, into the affordable housing. And 2 years ago, we were able to get funding for the Red Alder project, which is 85 units that are just being filled up today. So in my heart, I know that affordable housing is really a way up for people to move out of poverty and break that cycle that lasts for forever. So I really appreciate you people coming together today to do the work you do, because it's sometimes you have to look in that context to what you achieve to really gain that pleasure of how many people you help, because there is such a belief in the general public that you're giving people a handout, when in actuality, we're giving them a hand up, because without that handout, they will forever live in that poverty. So I thank you very much, and I wish you guys all well today.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Daniel. As you were talking, it just made me think about resilience and the timeline. You know, we've all been dealing with the COVID pandemic and the isolation that that's caused over the last year. But the decades and generations that the Little Shell Tribe have gone through and until reaching that federal recognition, it gives me a sense of hope that, you know, there is perseverance. It may take a long time, but we will get there together. So thank you so much for sharing your words. And we were so glad you could join us today at our housing conference.
It's been a great honor.
Thank you. The format of the conference this year is a little bit different, and we want to make sure that everyone knows how to access all of the great content that is available. Whova is the conference software that we are using this year. The Whova site is where you can find all of the session information and Zoom links. It's also where you can ask questions of conference hosts and connect with other attendees, presenters, and our sponsors, post messages, create discussion topics, and participate in our leaderboard and photo contests. We hope you take advantage and actively use the options available in Whova and all the great engagement available through this conference. Of course, the best thing about this conference is all of you, your vast experience, your inquisitive minds, your caring hearts, your willingness to share what you know and learn about what you don't, and your drive to always be doing more and better for the people and communities that we serve. In the spirit, we challenge you this year to ask at least one question, post at least one resource, or share at least one bit of your own perspective or advice in a session or through the app. That's it. 1, 2, 3. 1, a question, 1 resource, and 1 perspective or piece of advice. It is the engagement of every one of us that will make these 2 days valuable for all of us. The conference this year is hosted by Montana Housing, NeighborWorks Montana, and the Montana Continuum of Care Coalition. I want to say thank you to the steering committee and all of the presenters and staff who are part of this event. We appreciate all of your work and input these great 2 days we have planned together. And again, I want to thank you all for joining us, and I'm going to hand it over to Katie Biggs with NeighborWorks Montana. Thank you, everyone.
Hello, everybody. I echo Cheryl. We're so happy you're here with us today. If you guys haven't yet as attendees, please click on the chat icon at the bottom of your screen. Make sure you select all panelists and attendees and enter your name, organization, and location. We will ask that you engage and share using the chat during the plenary session. And during the plenary sessions, all participant lines are muted and only the panelists and presentations can be seen on the video. So if you're wondering why you haven't been able to see yourself, that is why. Using the chat for introductions is a way for us all to see who is here and in the room with us. All sessions are being recorded. This includes all of our breakout sessions and will be available on the Whova mobile app for 6 months and Whova online for 3 months following the conference. There's so much great content and it will all be available for you in case you're conflicted about something you can't attend live. If you have a technical issue, we ask that you please review the FAQ troubleshooting tips in Whova. If you need additional help, please send an email or call or text Todd Jackson. His contact information is in the chat and will be entered several times throughout. We would like to thank our sponsors. We encourage you to visit their sponsor booths in the Whova app and interact with them through the app. You can also see all their ads in the conference program that you receive virtually, which includes links to each of their websites. We would like to recognize in particular our lead sponsors. Wells Fargo is our platinum sponsor again this year. We have 2 gold sponsors, the Montana Division of Glacier Bank and NeighborWorks America. Our silver sponsor is the Montana Healthcare Foundation. The Montana Department of Commerce sponsored the program. Man Mortgage sponsored our conference notebooks that you should have received in the mail. US Bank sponsored our coffee talk tomorrow morning, which is our networking event. GMD is our community give back sponsor. RBC Markets is our award sponsor. And Enterprise Housing Credit Investments sponsored our People's Choice Award, which you'll hear more about later. Montana Housing and First Interstate Bank sponsored our plenary sessions. Each year, we invite our elected officials to address our attendees. Today, we have videos from Senator Daines, Senator Tester, and Governor Gianforte to share with you. Oh, maybe share with you. Just a second.
Warm welcome to the Montana Housing Partnerships Conference, and thanks for inviting me to share a few words with you all. You know, the past year has brought unprecedented challenges, especially to Montana housing projects. Thank you for all your hard work to combat the housing crisis facing Montana. It's critical that we continue to work together to provide roofs over Montanans' heads. I want you to know that I am working hard to ensure that the Office of Management and Budget does not strip our communities of their metropolitan designations. This will help ensure continued stable resources for your very important mission. Thanks again for having me, and I hope you all enjoy the rest of your conference.
That was a great address by Senator Daines, and we'll be hearing from Senator Tester and Governor Gianforte in just a second.
It's great to join you to help kick off the 2021 Montana Housing Partnership Virtual Conference. While we're in a virtual setting again this year, I'm encouraged that the days of virtual conferences will be behind us soon. I appreciate the work you've done to make this happen. As we know, finding affordable housing poses a serious challenge for too many Montana families. As our economy grows, There's a greater demand for workers, and those workers need a place to live and call home. Ultimately, our communities improve and grow stronger when folks can live and raise their families close to good-paying jobs. Unfortunately, we have a housing shortage in Montana, and it's making affordable housing out of reach for too many Montanans. This shortage is due in part to red tape that makes building and increasing our supply of homes more costly and less timely. This spring, I signed a market-driven bill to create an expedited review process for subdivisions. This new law cuts red tape and reduces unnecessary construction delays that will make it more affordable for Montanans to buy a home. It's only one way we're addressing this problem, especially as we come out of this pandemic. In early April, we launched the Emergency Rental Assistance Program to help Montanans who have lost income and are at risk of housing instability due to the pandemic. We estimate that this program will help thousands of Montana renters stay in their homes. I also recently signed House Bill 632, which appropriates Montana's share of the funding from the American Rescue Plan. This new law includes homeowner assistance funding for Montanans, as well as additional funds to support Montanans who are homeless or at risk of homelessness. Working together in public, private, and nonprofit partnerships, we can work to make home ownership more affordable and attainable in Montana. And we can support Montanans at risk of losing their homes due to the pandemic. I thank you for your leadership in tackling this crisis and wish you a very successful conference.
Hello from Washington, D.C., and thank you for inviting me to share a few words with you today. And thank you to everyone at Montana Housing Partnership and the Mountain Plains National Association of Housing and Redevelopment officials for hosting this conference. Wherever I go in Montana, from rapidly growing cities to our most frontier communities, I hear from families worried about being able to pay their rent or their mortgage, or who are unable to find housing at all. Lack of affordable housing is one of the most pressing issues facing the West, and it's hurting our economy and the ability of businesses to relocate to our region and create jobs. Unfortunately, the pandemic has pushed this crisis to a boiling point. We need creative, grassroots solutions from experts like you that we can take to Washington and get implemented. And that's why last year I brought together Montana advocates, public officials, and stakeholders from around the state for an affordable housing summit to put our heads together and find innovative ways to increase access to housing. Just a few weeks after that meeting, the pandemic hit, and folks across the country lost their jobs as businesses shuttered. Families could no longer afford to stay in their homes, just as they were being asked to stay inside to slow the spread of the coronavirus. That's why I fought hard to make sure that the most recent COVID relief legislation, the American Rescue Plan, included $50 million to support hard-hit Montana homeowners and help them avoid foreclosures, and why I'm proud to have secured $352 million for emergency rental assistance to help Montana families keep a roof over their heads. But there's a lot more work to be done across the state during this crisis. I'm looking forward to hearing the ideas that you discussed during this conference so we can work together to make sure families across the West have quality, affordable places to call home. Thank you again for all your work, and stay in touch.
We just offer a thank you again to Senator Daines, Governor Gianforte, and Senator Tester, and all our elected officials in the state of Montana. We now get the privilege of hearing from one of our lead sponsors, NeighborWorks America. We are honored to welcome Marietta Rodriguez, President and CEO of NeighborWorks America, to share some remarks and lead us into our rural panel discussion. Welcome, Marietta.
Get myself off mute. Good morning, everyone. It is my pleasure to be with you. My name is Marietta Rodriguez, and I'm the President and CEO of NeighborWorks America. And it's exciting for me to visit the state of Montana, even if it's virtually, but to join you all today. As some of you know, NeighborWorks America is a congressionally chartered nonprofit with a network of nearly 250 affiliates in all 50 states, the District of Columbia, and the island of Puerto Rico. And we've been working to create opportunities for people to live in affordable homes, improve their lives, and strengthen their communities for more than 40 years. I want to thank the governor, Senators Tester and Daines, and their staffs for their service to the state of Montana and being longtime friends and supporters to the work and mission of NeighborWorks. This is my first time joining the Montana State Housing Conference, and I've always heard so many wonderful things about this conference. I'm excited that NeighborWorks America is in such great company with the many sponsors of this conference, and we're happy to be among them. Montana has the great honor to have two NeighborWorks organizations in Montana. Both have had a huge impact on housing, resident leadership, and overall investment into the state. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention two former executives and friends of mine, Sheila Rice, who was the former executive director of NeighborWorks Great Falls. Sheila graciously served as an interim chief operating officer for NeighborWorks America upon her retirement from NeighborWorks Great Falls. And trust me when I tell you, she definitely left her mark and a big helping heap of Montana wisdom behind, and we're certainly better for it. I'd also like to give a shout out to Maureen Rood, former executive director of NeighborWorks Montana. Through her leadership, she definitely left an imprint on the NeighborWorks network. Currently, our two network organizations are being led by two remarkable women, Kaya Peterson at NeighborWorks Montana and Sherry Airy at NeighborWorks Great Falls. Thank you to all of these incredible women for their leadership, their contributions, and advancing the NeighborWorks mission throughout the state of Montana. I also want to thank the organizations of NeighborWorks Montana and NeighborWorks Great Falls and Wells Fargo for partnering with us for a very successful neighborhood lift program, a down payment assistance program that helped so many Montanans achieve their dream of home ownership. The work being done in Montana to increase opportunities for affordable housing is really impressive. And when I think about what's going on here, words that come to mind are collaboration and innovation. I think of collaboration of the statewide housing counseling service, that delivery model with 15 counseling partners that cover the state, and an innovation of addressing affordability through shared equity strategies like community land trusts, and the growing number of strong resident-owned communities working with ROC USA. But I also think of advocacy like Montana's Housing Coalition and housing preservation efforts through the Coal Severance Tax Trust Fund. And I think of community building and engagement like the high school houses, community cleanup, and the incredible volunteerism that happens in Great Falls. These serve as strong foundational approaches as you look to the future and consider tough issues like pandemic recovery, the pressure on housing stock, and the overall affordable housing, affordability to housing challenge. I've also been asked to share some observations about what's happening with NeighborWorks and about our latest undertakings. We've added 8 new affiliate organizations into our network this year, and it's something we haven't done for quite some time. These new groups bring such rich diversity of culture, geography, scale, as well as histories in serving their communities. Among these 8 new affiliates are 2 native serving organizations, Owista Corporation from Colorado and Lakota Funds, another CDFI in Kyle, South Dakota. As a result of their work, we're adding capacity and expertise that allows us to honor our commitment to better serve Native communities throughout the country. I was so touched by the opening this morning. I know that Montana is home to 8 federally recognized tribes as well, and we are committed to adding capacity and fostering innovation in the area of Native housing and community development, both on and off Indian reservations and Indian country. You may have heard that we also received $100 million in appropriated funds from Congress to implement a national housing counseling program to stave off evictions, foreclosures, and homelessness post-COVID-19. The Housing Stability Counseling Program will complement the federal relief measures that were already mentioned earlier by the senators, but to really help and boost our economy, support recovery in all the communities that we serve. We continue to capitalize on what we learned during the pandemic to add virtual and remote strategies for doing business going forward, including our significant shift to move many of our training and capacity building courses, such as the NeighborWorks Training Institutes and the Community Leadership Institute, to a virtual setting. In addition, our continued work and support in pandemic recovery, we remain committed to our core initiatives, such as the NeighborWorks Rural Initiative. The initiative focuses on assisting nearly 120 of our network organizations in capacity building with the goal of creating resilient and healthy rural communities for the residents that live in them. As we've seen during the past year, our network has elevated its work not only to address core difficulties around housing, but also stepping up into new spaces that support many different critical needs in rural communities, such as addressing disparities in access to broadband connectivity and working with our partners to support the preservation of affordable rural housing stock, and even working across food insecurity issues. I'm sure many of you seem the same. While there are many challenges ahead regarding affordability, inclusion, inclusionary resources, and coordination, this conference provides a wonderful opportunity to spark creativity in these areas and more. And I want to thank you for including NeighborWorks. Let's turn to the agenda. It's my pleasure to introduce the opening plenary session, which will bring together experts from the field of rural housing from NeighborWorks organizations across the country. This panel will discuss issues and solutions in rural housing, including native homeownership, diversity and inclusion, and how the COVID-19 pandemic has affected the work of rural housing organizations. Sarah Kacker, our Director of Rural Initiatives at NeighborWorks America, will moderate, and Sarah brings years of work in rural communities to the discussion. She'll be joined by Laura Buxbaum, Senior Vice President for Public Policy and Resource Development at Coastal Enterprises in Maine, Elizabeth Bridgewater, Executive Director for Wyndham and Whizzer Housing Trust, and Lori Moen, Chief Operating Officer for Grow South Dakota. So let's get started, and I turn it over to Sarah.
Yeah, and real quickly, Marietta, we cannot wait to host you in Montana in person when it is safe to do so.
I can't wait.
Yeah, it'll be great. I just thank you for the work you do, for the training, the innovation, the collaboration, and the support you provide each of us in this state that we get to help our entire network in our state. So thank you for taking a few minutes today. And what a great intro to Sarah. Sarah, go ahead and take it away.
Thank you so much, Katie, and good morning, everyone. Thank you so much to all of our hosts for having me here today to lead a conversation with such an esteemed group of leaders in the rural housing and community development space. Each of these women and their organizations represent years of experience working directly on building stronger rural communities through increasing accessibility to quality rural housing and economic development for all residents. The goals of today's session are to share with you, our Montana colleagues, what some of our peers and other rural places are doing and experiencing right now. We always learn a lot from one another that brings clarity to our own experiences and sparks new ideas. Excuse me. I will now tee up some questions for all of our speakers across a range of topics that communities here in Montana will likely relate to, including rural housing, rental assistance, food security, childcare, and partnerships with tribal communities. We plan to have about 10 minutes at the end of the session for some Q&A. So again, our speakers who Marietta introduced are Laura Buxbaum of CEI Maine, Lori Moen of Grow South Dakota, and Elizabeth Bridgewater of Windsor and Wyndham Trust. So I would like to start by asking each speaker on our panel to share some of the most critical housing issues that you're facing in your communities right now, And how has COVID impacted your current needs? So let's just start with Laura, maybe if you could go ahead and kick us off, that'd be great.
Sure. Thank you, Sarah. And it's a great honor to be on this panel. And although it's much more convenient for me to be here virtually, I just have to share that I've never been to Montana and I've always wanted to go. So I hope maybe there will be another opportunity to come in person. One of the reasons for that, well, I always wanted to go to Montana, but since I've been in Maine, I've noticed a lot of convergences and similarities. Kaya Peterson and I served together on the NeighborWorks Rural Advisory Council, and we often note that there are a lot of similarities. And some of those are demographic. Maine has a population of about 1.3 million people. It's growing per the last census, but much more slowly than the rest of the country. Our diversity is growing a little bit, but we are still 94% white. And we're one of the oldest states in the nation with a median age of 41. 21% of us are over 65. So what does that mean for housing? Even before the pandemic, we had an aging housing stock. We're in a cold area, as are some of you. And so heating expenses are a big issue, especially with older, draftier farmhouses in the rural areas. We have a significant lack of rental housing. There's a higher percentage of home ownership, but and houses are a little less expensive here than they are in other parts of the country, but not necessarily affordable to the people who live in those communities. And of the rental housing that we do have, the multifamily housing, about 8,000 units of that are financed by USDA, the Section 515 program, and are facing mortgage maturities and aging owners and are in jeopardy of being lost. COVID has created both huge challenges and some really big opportunities for us. So among the challenges are the ones that we're all sharing, I think. People are, having a hard time paying their rents and mortgages. People are have been unable to get to work because of lack of childcare, because of exposure to COVID, because some industries that are really important to Maine have had slowed down or been shut down, at least temporarily. The restaurant industry, tourism is huge here. Food businesses have had to really pivot and figure out new markets. And that's affected the workforce, and that's affected people's ability to pay their rent and get to work and pay their mortgages. The federal programs that created forbearance and the eviction moratorium, that's the word I'm looking for, have certainly helped, but that's a stopgap, and we expect that there will be more foreclosures and that there will be more evictions, but we're getting a lot of resources to help to forestall that. So Maine, as a small state minimum recipient, got $200 million of emergency rental assistance, and there's another $152 million that's going to be released shortly. This is an amazing windfall, I would say, but it actually creates a big challenge for a state as small as ours, because while we think that the need is there, possibly to spend all that money, the capacity of the community action agencies to actually, and Maine Housing, our housing finance agency, to administer that is really not sufficient. I'm a Maine Housing Commissioner, and I just heard from our director this morning, and they're doing a lot of work to ramp up their capacity, but it's going to take it's a heavy lift. Similarly, the homeownership assistance program hasn't quite rolled out yet. We're waiting for Treasury guidance, or we're waiting for interpretation of the Treasury guidance on that. that's going to be a big help to people facing possible foreclosure. But there's a lot of work to get the word out and a lot of work to get the money out. We also we're getting more resources to actually develop housing, which will be amazing, much needed. But at the same time, we've had a flood of out-of-staters coming to our beautiful, rural, relatively safe state, buying up real estate, and there are bidding wars going on for, not just for people with low incomes, but for moderate income folks or even some higher income folks, where you go and you look at a house and somebody has paid cash $50,000 over the asking price the minute they got there. So those are some of the challenges that we're facing. I just want to say one quick word about my organization, CEI. We're a 45-year-old community development financial institution and CDC. We've been a NeighborWorks organization for about 7 years. And we are not actually primarily in housing. I think we'll have a chance to talk about that a little bit later. We work more in economic development and business assistance, but we see those strong connections, and we see how housing affects the workforce and the businesses that are trying to survive.
Thank you, Laura, so much. I know that many in Montana probably feel a lot the same way as you do, as you noted the synergies between, especially with housing prices and the demand and the multiple bidders. And I'm sure Lori and Elizabeth have probably seen that too. So Lori, do you want to give us a quick blurb on how COVID has impacted your current needs and what are the most critical issues in your communities?
I would reiterate the same things that Laura had said. And I'll probably put a little different spin on how it's been affected. There was a pressure for market demand in our rural communities to begin with prior to COVID, but now we're seeing that being increased overwhelmingly. And it's taking pressure on our rural communities when we see the limited human capital available in our rural communities. And then their time is invaluable commodity for these rural communities that they don't have designated staff to address the housing needs that are they're being stretched beyond capacity right now. So when we're looking at that, yes, it's great to build a house or to renovate a house, but we also need to be looking at how do we build smart communities? How do we address that for future generations to come when we're building and when we're renovating, and taking a more intentional approach in our building and not a reactionary, let's pull back the reins a little bit and really look at how do we want our communities to be after and during this huge demand that we're seeing right now. We also are seeing the inflated prices for building. We had a developer that had same floor plans, same neighborhood as last year, same house, seeing it come in at least $15,000 higher in price. There again, trying to build affordability. Well, now if I needed a gap with that price range last year, now I've just increased that $15,000 to, so hoping that there again, our state will be able to look at what are some of the resources that are coming to us and fill that gap. We have a governor's house program here, and where the inmates build the property or the houses and then they're transferred onto the properties. They're seeing a 19% increase in materials. So I think that's something that we're seeing nationally. It's not just in one state or another. And it just exacerbates the affordability for our communities, and especially in our rural communities where we're already having difficulty getting contractors to come to our remote areas and build one or two versus multiple houses. So the economy of scale isn't in our rural to begin with. So we're just finding that just a little bit more challenging. The same property that had the $15,000 increase generally has 2 to 3 contractors that would bid, had 1. So we're also seeing that demand outside of the affordability is high as well.
Great, thank you, Lori. And Elizabeth, back to the East Coast again in Vermont, if you could share a few thoughts with us on your critical.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me to be a part of this conference. Like Laura, I've never been to Montana, and I would love to be there. One of my dearest friends is there right now, hiking and spending time with family. So I'm there in spirit. So Vermont, I thought I'd give kind of a snapshot of what some of the housing dynamics are in Vermont. I just read a report that said that we had the lowest affordability rate in the country. And it's not necessarily due to extraordinarily high housing costs, although they are rising in certain markets in Vermont, but it really has to do with very low income and wages for most of the state. So, in listening to a lot of the opening remarks, very focused on affordable housing, the other side of the equation is the wage disparity in America. And that doesn't often get talked about, but that is a major driver of affordability. And we certainly see that in Vermont. Just to put a fine point on that just 16% of Vermonters can afford a mortgage at today's prices. It's an extremely low number. We are also experiencing high cost of construction that was already in play before the pandemic. I think part of that is that because the wages are so low, there's really not a construction industry in Vermont that's really robust. In fact, most of the new housing starts are in the affordable housing space. There isn't a lot of market rate housing going up in Vermont. And so there just isn't a high level of construction activity across the state. In addition to that, like I'm sure is very true in Montana as well, there's a lack of public infrastructure in a lot of buildable areas. So as developers, we're always looking for water and sewer. It limits the areas that we can develop in because those site costs drive up the overall cost per unit and it makes it harder to build. Just again, to put a little bit of statistics on that, our housing stock grew just 0.116% over the last 5 years. In the 80s, it was growing at 1.81%. So it was already low and then it dropped. So one of the challenges I think that we're experiencing with the pandemic, and I'll get into the intersection of all this money flooding into the state, is we have a system that's sized for these dynamics. And now we've got all this money flowing in and we want to, take advantage of this opportunity, but you can't expand that system, which includes, private developers, affordable housing developers, contractors, workers. It's just all been sized for many, many years for less financial activity. So that's something that we're grappling with right now. How do we expand capacity in order to meet this opportunity? A couple of other dynamics are that 27% of renters in Vermont live in single family homes. So we don't have a ton of multifamily housing. And even, if you look at our portfolio, which is about 800 rental units, a lot of the especially in the early days that we were developing 30 years ago, were in multifamily homes that were, 4 units, 2 units. We have a lot of those older scattered site kind of more expensive to operate properties. And so, and that's compared to 9% nationally. So that kind of puts that into perspective. And then we have a big tourist economy in Vermont. And so a lot of these Airbnb rentals are being used now for a lot of rentals, single family homes are being used for short-term rentals. And that makes up 2.5% of our whole rental stock. So it seems like a small number, but when you think about how many people are living in single family homes, it just, all of these factors create pressure. I want to go back to the income issue. 74% of all Vermonters earn less than area median income. So again, we have certain high income markets, and that's in the Burlington area along the Lake Champlain Valley, but everywhere else in Vermont, and that includes some of the other smaller cities, it's just extraordinarily low income. And so we just have this sort of pressure this dynamic between cost and income that really has really shut down the housing market here. Just looking towards some of the responses around COVID, like what Laura said, 80% of the new buyers flooding the market are out of state. We're in very close proximity to Connecticut and New York, which got very hard hit. Boston, by the pandemic, and we're just seeing a ton of people fleeing to Vermont to feel safer and buy up a lot of homes. So that's creating even more pressure. I talked to the president of our local community bank, and they doubled their mortgage activity in the last year, and virtually all of it was from out-of-state buyers. So it's really creating a lot of pressure. And then finally, we also have the high heat costs and operating costs with these larger Victorian drafty homes that got built during a time when I think wood was more readily available and lower cost. So that's the challenge. That was sort of where we were before the pandemic hit. And so you add a massive job loss and just the economic hit that people took, and it just really created a lot of crises for folks. Sarah, do you want me to jump into what we've done, some of the responses? Because I can.
Sure. I think that all of you gave really great, thorough introductions, and we're going to be, as some of those responses, it could be a good segue into also what other types of work is your organization involved in right now. Some of you may be involved in some of this other, and I know Laura hinted at that as well. And how does that work intersect with housing? So I think, Elizabeth, I'll let you just move into that second category or question here before we still move on to a discussion around READY and then a native collaboration. So can just move right in, Elizabeth. It's great. Thank you.
Okay, great. One thing I love about working in Vermont is how collaborative it is. And so during especially the early days of the crisis, we, as a housing industry, we met every week, every Friday afternoon, and just kind of brainstormed and strategized about what we were going to do. Vermont has a very high homelessness population relative to the population. And so when pandemic CARES Act money flowed into the state, a lot of it was directed to make sure that Vermonters weren't living on the street. And in fact, in a very short period of time, we sort of solved homelessness. It was literally like almost overnight, nobody was living in a tent or in the woods or on the streets in Vermont. And instead, they were living in motels paid for with FEMA money. And then the question became, how do we address this in a long-term way? And $34 million of the CARES Act funds were allocated to this strategy of helping people find a permanent home. And many developers like the Wyndham and Windsor Housing Trust stepped up and purchased motels and paired that with social services and rental assistance vouchers and created new supportive services communities as part of the response. I think there's 250 new units that were created just with CARES Act money alone. Our organization bought a 36 unit motel and developed it in 3 months. It was the wildest ride I've ever been on, but it really helped make a difference in our community. One of the things that Vermont did also was a program called Everyone Eats, and it used some of its CARES Act money to pay local restaurants to provide free meals to the community. So it funneled food to families that were really struggling with food insecurity, but it did through the restaurants. So it was both a way to keep small businesses afloat and meet the needs of families that were struggling with food insecurity. And frankly, you didn't have to prove anything. You just showed up and got dinner in a bag from whatever restaurant you chose. And that went on for months, and it really helped sustain the local business community and local families. And like a lot of states, we also had the rental assistance program that flowed right through the Vermont State Housing Authority, who did an incredible job of deploying those monies and kind of, I think in some ways, depleted them completely, because when the new funds came in, the ARPA funds, or actually the interim money between CARES Act and ARPA, they ended up outsourcing it because they just really worked to the limits of their capacity. It was really a heroic effort. So those are some of the, and one final thing actually, which might be interesting to hear, is Vermont allocated some of its money for private owners It was a little bit controversial. Some folks in the affordable housing field were really struggling with giving straight grants to private property owners and whether that was a good use of public money. I'm one of the people that really supported the program because all of those dynamics that I described earlier really affect the private sector as well. And so we deployed a program along with other homeownership centers across the state to provide $30,000 to private property owners per unit to bring vacant units back online. And a lot of vacant units are in Vermont because of deferred maintenance and safety issues. And the landlords were required to work with the local continuum of care to prioritize folks that were coming out of the motels. It was a priority, but not a requirement. So not everybody did that with the spirit that we were hoping, but a lot of people did. And we saw direct impact for folks that were experiencing homelessness through this program. We created, if you think about new units, because they were vacant, 59 in 3 months, working with private landlords. And part of that, we strengthened our relationship with private landlords, which have been somewhat challenged because they perceive us as getting all the money, and none of it flows to the private sector because of these economic dynamics. So this was a way for us to support them and provide new housing to vulnerable folks as well. So it's been a great partnership. We're hoping to continue this program with the ARPA money coming through.
Excellent.
I'll stop there and hear from
Okay. Thank you so much. And to feed on the Vermont Eats, I'll just note really quickly, in the state of Oklahoma, I think there was something called a receipt wall in the many rural communities in Oklahoma where people could come in and just pre-buy meals of any sort, and they would tape them up on the wall. And anyone who needs one can come take a receipt, and it's prepaid for food. And it's really something that's taken off across their state, and it affects and assists local businesses too. So thank you so much. Speaking of food security and childcare, I'll quickly move to Laura before we get to Lori and move on to the Ready and Native collaboration. So Laura.
Sure, yeah. So CEI's mission is to help grow good jobs, environmentally sustainable enterprises, and a more broadly shared prosperity. And we do that through business assistance and financing. But the jobs piece is what really, something that Elizabeth said really struck a chord with me and really resonates with some of the work that we do, that we've done before COVID and are continuing to do, which is that being in a rural and aging state, we just don't have enough workforce to do all the jobs that need to be done. And particularly now with sort of these new capacity needs, it's super, super challenging. So we're doing a number of things on a policy level. We work with partners to try to find ways to make Maine more welcoming to immigrants, both immigrants from outside of the country and immigrants from outside of the state, ways to retain, to keep young people in Maine, and then also ways to help businesses recruit and retain existing workers and help reduce some of the barriers to work that some people have. We have about a 60% job participation rate in the state of age eligible workers, which is low. It's lower than the United States average, which I think it's 65 or 66, something like that. And that, as I mentioned, has been exacerbated by COVID. One of the areas that is really challenging is childcare, and childcare centers closed down when COVID started. The ones that exist have challenges to find enough qualified workers. There is a huge wage issue in that industry. And so one of the things that we've done is that we've started something, and this was pre-COVID, but we started something called the Childcare Business Lab, which works directly with would-be childcare center owners or people who are providing existing daycare, maybe in their homes or at a very small scale, who want to grow that. And we help them get the business acumen they need to open up those childcares and At the same time, we work with them on figuring out ways to provide better jobs for the workers. So there's not a whole lot you can do about wage structure, particularly if you're using subsidized slots. But there are ways that you can make those jobs more participatory, make the scheduling work better for folks, provide, if you can't do full-on healthcare, do a healthcare stipend, and then also provide ways, career ladders for people entering. And as a parallel effort, we've also been one of the leaders on a bill in the state legislature that would help to create career ladders and provide sort of bonus pay for childcare workers who get certain levels of certification. So that's been a really interesting project. Our first cohort of 8 folks is in the process of opening up their daycares now, and I think 7 of the 8 are doing that. We have another cohort now in Lewiston, Maine, which is in a predominantly immigrant neighborhood with, I think, 18 people to start, and hopefully they may not all start daycare. Some of them are actually getting certified as childcare educators or doing other things, but that will help to both increase the supply and hopefully address some of the work age disparities. In terms of food, one of the sectors that we've focused on as to provide investment and technical assistance is agriculture and aquaculture and food systems generally. And in the pandemic, so we've always had investment programs for food related businesses. We've always provided specialized business advising to those businesses. In the pandemic, there was a bunch of CARES Act that came to the state that was for grants to food related businesses. And the state turned to us as a partner to say, we don't have the capacity to actually get this money out the door. Can you do it? And in 2 months, CEI got about $17 million out the door to food related businesses to help reimburse them for expenses that they had incurred to, for instance, to buy a freezer so that they could change their market from direct sales to supermarkets or from schools to direct sales or whatever worked for them. We've also done a lot of business advising directly to food and other businesses around PPP and EIDL funds and helped them to access those funds so that they could keep going. And then done a lot of follow-on investment with some of those folks who are actually now growing now that they're able to get back to some semblance of full business.
Great. Thank you, Laura. There's just been so much going on in both Vermont and in Maine. And now we're going to just go to South Dakota with Lori, who you can speak about some of the other efforts. We've got about 20 minutes left before Q&A. And so, Lori, if you could touch on some of the other areas, and then we'll move on to the collaboration.
Some of the other things that we're seeing here that we provide is the daycare part of it. We do business lending and helping those facilitate through their mortgage payments that maybe have been a challenge during the CARES Act or the COVID time. And we also see more of our rural communities where our gas stations or other smaller businesses are providing food. Maybe they're adding a freezer, or they're adding a refrigerator, or they're adding a shelving unit for food supply for their local constituents there. And I guess I look at some of the other initiatives that we've been doing. We do what's called a First Impressions Tour. And that is where we take 5 community leaders, generally economic development leaders, and they go to the corresponding community and determine what do they see that's good in their community? What do they see that maybe is hidden in their community, and lift those up and bring those challenges. And some of those are around those daycare and those hard to fill, grocery or those service areas. And it provides them with a mentor to reach out to, that share those successes and challenges. But those are just a few of those. We also did the CARES funding for food pantries. So bringing food supply into those areas of need. And also, the hygiene products, the non-SNAP items that you cannot find, supplying different resources for that particular area of need.
Excellent. Thank you, Lori. Now, I'd like to move just for a short time on to discuss race, equity, diversity, inclusion. So we're ready. Elizabeth, would you like to kick us off on this by just quickly discussing what READY means to you in a rural context and how you are navigating this? You really have some great experiences in learning, both at your organizational level and in your community, that I think can serve as some great models for this work. If you don't mind sharing a couple minutes on that.
Sure. I came into this role in January 2018, so just about 3 years ago, and it happened to be when we were starting our strategic plan. And so I asked the board to think about what role we had as a housing organization around racial equity in particular. And it was it was kind of a provocative question, because I think I have a really lovely board and a really wonderful community that I work in, but Vermont is a primarily white state, and I think after hundreds of years of segregation, it wasn't on the top of the mind of the board at that moment in time, and so I sort of was greeted with a so that's important, so that's kind of where we started 3.5 years ago, and with a lot of open-heartedness and compassion for the impact of segregation and racism on white communities, and a lot of white folks just not being fully aware of what some of the issues are. We sort of started there and began talking about systemic racism in the housing field, and how the fact that Vermont was so white wasn't really by accident. It was somewhat by design. And that plays out in a lot of different ways in Vermont. We don't have some of the red line communities that happen in more urban neighborhoods. I worked in Boston for many years and lived in some of those neighborhoods. So I'm very aware that that specific tool of institutional racism had an impact on cities. In Vermont, it's just out, in some cases, it's just outright violence and intimidation that happens pretty visibly too. And that's still going on today. So we're kind of working through these questions as an organization, and we've matured in the conversation over the last 3.5 years. And we're kind of organizing our work in 3 ways now. The first is foundational work, which is really critical. And that is just building an atmosphere and resources and space for both the board and the staff to just increase their education around these issues, increase awareness, learn, make mistakes, ask questions, and start to build our understanding about institutional racism and how that plays out in our communities. The second is an enterprise level change. So we've been working with a consultant. We commissioned a comprehensive report that reached out to our residents. Even though we have a small number of BIPOC residents, we wanted to hear their voice and how they experience the organization, so that we could see, are there any barriers that we're creating as an organization that we may not even be aware of? And what does that mean for folks that are trying to access our services? And so we did that. And then that's flowing into some policy changes and ways that we're shifting the way that we do business. We're also updating our strategic plan right now, and it's become a central question. And we've we borrowed from another NeighborWorks organization, an equity lens that we're using as part of our strategic plan. We've diversified our board with new BIPOC board members. And that's what we're doing at the enterprise level change. And then at the community, and then the third is the community change, and really being part of the conversation at the community level, so that when issues like the murder of George Floyd and others happened over the summer, we weren't caught, not knowing what to say or how to engage in the public around the response. We didn't want to feel like we were responding in a knee-jerk fashion, but that or like we were new to the conversation, even though in some ways we are. But really a thoughtful, more in-depth way of talking about these issues, so that it's not just episodic, but it's baked into our DNA, and so that when issues come up or community members are looking for allies, we can respond in an intelligent and supportive way. And finally, at the community change level, we're also working at the state level with our partners. We're with the support of NeighborWorks of America, and some state funding, and from the Vermont Housing Finance Agency, to develop a whole speaker series for the whole state, so that we can then amplify some of these historic systemic racism across the state and build that awareness. So some of these are sort of iterative. What we're doing kind of, weaves in and out of itself. And then we're building some local partnerships. There's a wonderful new land trust that's forming, that's BIPOC led, right in our kind of core community that we've been located for 30 years. So we reached out to the leaders of that group. One of them is a Black American and the other is a Native woman, and just asking them, do you need help? If so, how could we be helpful? And we've started a really lovely conversation about ways that we can use our capacity to amplify their leadership, grow their capacity to lead in this way, and utilize some of our expertise to help them acquire land. I was very moved by what, it was Daniel, the opening speaker, and just chronicling the issues around land access and how critical that is to creating that sense of belonging. I mean, the idea of sort of being a community-less people was just awful to hear. And that tie to land ownership and land control is very much aligned with the Black American experience as well. So to think about a land trust forming in our community that is Afro-Indigenous led is so exciting to me. And so we're in the early stages of how, figuring out how we can support them. And then finally, I'll just say, a lot of the issues that come up in this conversation are really around safety and belonging. And so they're not just policy initiatives or program initiatives, but really heart initiatives, like really opening your heart to having empathy and standing with people in a way that can help foster safety. There's a sense of allyship in Vermont that's growing, that is actually looking for allies in every single town in Vermont, that are white people who are willing to stand up and say, if racism rears its ugly head, if violence happens, I'm willing to stand up and stand with you and be visible about that. And that's an initiative that's happening at the state level. We're not involved in pushing that forward, but we're aware of it and see ourselves as those kind of allies. So that's a little bit of what, obviously there's a lot of depth to all of these components, but I'll stop there. And
thank you, Elizabeth. And there are some great questions in the chat around just in some specifics around some of your work that we'll get to in just a moment. I'm going to let that information from you, Elizabeth, sort of serve it as a segue into our discussion around Native collaborations and into the partnerships. And Lori, I would love to have you, if you could start discussing your partnership program in South Dakota and how non-Native organizations can be good partners to these groups, because you've got some great experience.
Absolutely. Very fortunate to be part of what is called the South Dakota Native Home Ownership Coalition. And I would encourage attendees to go to the track that is going to be here at the Montana conference. Lakota Vogel will be there, and she will do a great job on that. But take if you have the opportunity to go and be part of that discussion. But when I think of the partnerships that we have with Native organizations or Native communities, I go back to look at your own organization itself. What is your capacity? What is your skill level? What are areas that you have that could be shared? Can you be the gateway? Can you be a mentor for different sectors or links for the Native American organizations that are grassroots? Have the ability and the talent, but maybe don't have the link, or might have 5 pieces of the resources, missing another one. Can you be that missing link? I would also look at when we're looking for how to be good partners, provide relevant expertise. You as an organization may have some expertise that is very relevant to that particular organization. I always say be a hoop hopper or a step climber, because most of us in this affordable housing developers have an understanding of how to jump through hoops and how to get to the next level. And housing itself is complex. And then we can talk again, but when we bring in the various barriers or more hoops within native lands, it just becomes overwhelming. So share your successes and your skills. I'm going to put a plug out here for USDA Rural Development is a key source for home ownership, home renovation for native lands. And if you are a USDA certified 502 packager, this is a prime opportunity for you to become a valid partner with Native organizations.
Excellent. Lori, what are some of the barriers to increasing the homeownership in some Native communities? What have you experienced in your organization and your work?
Like I said, there's quite a few complex areas, and probably the primary area is the financing, the gap financing there. The cost to build is higher on tribal lands. The lack of contractors, distance to travel for suppliers. They're generally in remote areas. New construction or major renovation may not be within the ability to repay once it's completed. So having that gap, that financing structure. Infrastructure, again, we're in a remote area. The high cost to develop roads or even to bring water into the area, utilities. If you're going to dig a well or if you're going to be on rural water system, some of the rural water systems have moratoriums. So there is no new development for water. What we're seeing here was a lack of appraisers to do appraisals on tribal lands. Even if they could build, a lender is going to need collateral valuation. So if you're using the 184 or a USDA product, you're still going to need to have that valuation. And so that appraiser is really difficult. And then finding comps on these native lands or tribal or lease lands is another deterrent. The Native Home Ownership Coalition is actually working with the appraisers in South Dakota and trying to get some interns or apprentice to begin increasing those numbers. There's several more, but those are probably the top ones.
It's an exhaustive list.
It is, but there's hope, and I would say there is hope because we can do it. You know?
Yes, and you guys have just done a wonderful job. In the last few minutes before the Q&A starts, Laura, I'd love to just hear CEI's experience also on the East Coast with Native communities, and then we'll move into the Q&A.
Yeah. And I also want to quickly touch on Reddy and racial disparities, but
Please do.
CEI 20 years ago helped to found a Native CDFI here in Maine, Four Directions Development Corporation. We've had it's majority Native led, but we've had the opportunity to have a representative on that board for 20 years, and I'm currently the representative on the board, which has been a huge education for me and an honor. Four Directions does both small business lending and housing lending and community, increasingly community development lending. So we do provide some technical expertise to them, but they've grown their own a lot. But one of the homeownership barriers that I don't know enough about, but I will just say is that homeownership rules are different on different tribal lands. So Four Directions represents the 4 tribes of the Wabanaki Confederacy, and those tribes don't all have the same sovereignty status, and they don't all have the same land ownership rules. And so for one of the tribes, it's much more challenging to create home ownership than for the others. So that's one issue. I just want to circle back quickly to racial disparities, because Maine, like many of these other states, is majority white, well, more than majority white, obviously, 94% white. But in April, people of color made up 26% of the homeless population. As of last June, we had the highest racial disparity for COVID, for illness and death in the nation. That's gotten better since then, but that was amazing. And I was just looking at our emergency rental assistance program stats, and over 10% of the recipients are people of color. So for instance, over 5% Black or African American versus a population of 1.6% Black and African American. So CEI, like many other organizations, is trying to figure out what is our role. We are also have entered into a diversity, equity, inclusion initiative, and we are working both internally and externally. We participate in a governor's permanent commission that was set up on Black, Indigenous, people of color commission, and trying to figure out, like Elizabeth, how to be the best white allies we can, and how to also navigate some of the tensions that arise between Indigenous Black populations and the African immigrant population. And some of those many of those are asylees, so there are different rules. And so we're working in that realm as well.
Excellent.
Lots more to say about that, but we don't have time.
Yeah. We've got a lot of questions. We've got some in the Q&A and some in the chat. And what I'd love to do now is I'm going to be going through them as we receive them. And first, I'm going to sort of lump 2 of them together for you, Elizabeth. A question was, does your organization do its own property management? And then what equity lens is your organization building from?
Yeah, so we have a portfolio of a little over 800 units. About 350 of them are managed in-house because they all are in a very close area of Brattleboro, Vermont, which is where our office first started 30 years ago through a merger with an organization that further north. We acquired an additional number of properties, and they had a property management company already in place that was a third-party property management company. So we kept that arrangement. They do a really nice job. So it's a little bit of a hybrid. It creates a little bit more work on the asset management side, but it also enables us to keep our property management operations fairly modest. The equity lens that we use is asked, I brought it up after I read that in the chat, just asked 3 questions: who, what, and how. And so the first question is, who benefits, who is burdened, and who's providing input, which is a really great question. And it's actually changed the way I've started thinking about who's at the table. And one example is that we are starting a new pilot program that's on this to provide supportive services to families. And there's kind of this tight knit group of supportive service organizations that traditionally get together. And as we were thinking about who we were going to invite to a kind of a collaborative conversation about this, I started thinking, well, who's not usually at the table? And, you know, some of these women that I described earlier that are building this farm and the land trust that is directly approaching food security, we decided to invite them, and they haven't traditionally been involved in any of these community conversations. So that's been really great to kind of just remind, you know, it's like the lens is sort of a reminder to build your muscle to think about these things that you may not have been thinking about in the past. What are the barriers to equity? What are the resources that are needed to overcome those barriers? And what are the potential unintended outcomes? And then how are we going to address them specifically? How will we alleviate any negative impacts that might come up? How will we communicate that change? And then how will we follow up in order to evaluate the effectiveness of our efforts? So those are the three questions, and I'm happy to make this available to anybody that would like to steal it from me. We took it from another organization, and such a great thing about being part of the NeighborWorks network, you get to share all these resources. So
Yes.
I'm happy to pass it forward.
I want it,
Exactly.
Elizabeth.
Okay,
Yeah.
on the way.
And I think that, and speaking to that is too, there are a lot more questions than we will be able to get to here in the next 5 or 6 minutes. And I know that Katie with NeighborWorks Montana sort of summarizing all of them, think that we can still get those to the speakers. Some really great questions. I want to go quickly. I'm going to keep you each to one of these. There's a question in the Q&A. What do each of you see as critical infrastructure and policy issues moving forward? So if each of you can just hit what your top critical infrastructure and your top policy issue would be, and then maybe we can still get in another one of the 7 or 8 questions. So who wants to run first on that? I'll go with Lori. Sorry.
Oh, critical infrastructure. I go back to in policy. Right now, we have a housing study going on right now. So maybe that is a way to begin the discussion of what is important when it comes to housing. What is the need in your community? What's the need in policy going forward? We need to have a dedicated resource in each of our states' hands so that they can rely every year on having funding for that gap financing, for those structures, for those conversations to take place, for the capacity building into our communities. So I'll leave it with that and let someone else go on.
Laura, looks like you're unmuted.
Yep, broadband, huge infrastructure, absolutely critical. And then on policy, I'm going to go a little bit higher level, and I'm going to say that voter rights that I want a Congress that can work, and I want people to be represented. And I think it is absolutely critical in our country for rural and urban areas that we have that, and voting rights is just the biggest issue. Oh, but also climate change. So I know that gets a little bit beyond our housing topic here, but it's top of mind for us.
There are definite intersections and touch points there, Laura. And Elizabeth.
I'll speak from a developer perspective. So municipal water and sewer are the critical issues for opening up opportunities for more housing in Vermont. Mm-hmm. And then this is a little esoteric, but aligning our funding opportunities so that funding dollars for housing development are available at the same time that applications for project-based vouchers are available, at the same time funding for supportive services are available, because those 3 pieces of that 3-legged stool that can help our more vulnerable residents that need supportive services, it'll help build that infrastructure to support those folks. And right now we have a very siloed funding environment. And so if that could all be aligned, we would do a much better job, I think, meeting the needs of more vulnerable Vermonters.
Excellent. So we've got two sort of, I would say, topics, two more topics that are represented in the chat. One, there were several comments around the intersection. There was homeless and mental illness. So some of those social services wrap around. That's a quite an extensive intersection there. And so there were some thoughts. I don't know if any of you have quick thoughts off that, or you might want to chew on that a bit and maybe get back in some question answers to Katie for the group. But I did see it come up several times. So any quick thoughts on any of your intersections with social service, mental illness?
I could jump in real quick because we built two supportive services communities, one before the pandemic 2 years ago and the other in the middle of the pandemic. And what we believe to be true is to be really successful providing housing and services to folks that are struggling with chronic mental health issues and addiction are two things: having on-site supportive services that are both directly for the individual through case management with clinical partners, and community building activities that really build the culture and the community. And the reason why we know that's so critical is because during the pandemic, that second piece got dropped off because we couldn't have space for people to gather. And this community that we had created that was actually quite thriving and feeling very connected, and the sense of belonging and frankly kind of a special community has begun to fray at the edges. And we're needing to, now that we're facing reopening, we're going to need to do a lot of rebuilding. And so that piece we know is such a critical component. So it's individual support and community building.
Can I just jump in and add, I think that substance use disorder is a huge issue, and also prison populations or people who have been involved with the criminal justice system, many of whom, probably a majority of whom, suffer from either substance use disorder or other mental and emotional issues. And so wraparound services and resources and supports are so necessary for those folks who have such a hard time even getting landlords, getting jobs or getting housing.
Okay. And Lori.
I was just gonna say, many of the states receive the emergency solutions grants, and I think that's going to be a huge component when we start talking about that diversity and including and making sure that they're getting to the right place, the right housing, the right dynamics. But I would check with your state housing agencies on who provides that funding source for those families.
Excellent, thank you. And in my last minute, this is gonna be a visual. This is your answer to this question. You're either gonna go like this, or down. So there was a question about how remote workers are impacting your housing values, land values in your states. And they've seen quite a rise in Montana. So I'm gonna ask all three of you, which directions, all going. Okay, so Laura's got a mix, but yeah, in Vermont and South Dakota, it's all up. There's a mix. But I think it is fair to say that, and that ties into Laura's broadband and critical infrastructure, it's definitely something that many rural communities are struggling through and working with of what remote work, also the other impacts on communities. So, well, I want to thank all of you so much. All of you are just, again, great leaders in your organizations, and your work is really moving this space forward. So thank you so much for joining me for this discussion and sharing all of your experiences. And thank you again to our NeighborWorks Montana crew for having us here today. And I'm going to pass it back to Katie.
Hello, everyone. It's Kaya Peterson with NeighborWorks Montana. I can't see myself, so hopefully you all can hear me. Thank you so much, Sarah, Laura, Lori, and Elizabeth. What a phenomenal start to our conference. I'm always so inspired by our NeighborWorks America colleagues, and I hope that all of you joining us today have gained some inspiration and some confidence that what we're facing here in Montana is not unique to us, and that there are great people all across the country who we can learn from and draw on their experience as we look for ways to address the needs here. Sarah raised this issue of housing people with serious mental illness, and a lot of you asked about that in the chat. I just want to, again, draw your attention to the Whova app. There's great opportunity there to share community conversations, and that might be a great one to put there on Whova. I wanted to acknowledge that our panel this morning was sponsored by First Interstate Bank. So thank you to First Interstate Bank for their support and their sponsorship. Oh, hold on a second, folks. Sorry, technical difficulties. Okay. Again, thanks to the panelists. So before we move on to our break, I just want to share a couple of logistics. And before I do that, I wanted to pause for a moment this morning to recognize Kathy Bailey. I know many of you heard the sad news last week that Kathy passed away from cancer on Friday. Kathy was the founding director of the Snowy Mountain Development Corporation based in Lewistown and serving a 6-county area. Over 10 years, Kathy built SMDC into a multi-million-dollar organization with a mission of improving economic and social conditions through conservation, utilization, expansion, and development of resources in the area. I know Kathy was a cherished colleague for so many of you. I personally had the pleasure of working with her over the past 10 years, first in small business economic development. And then when I joined NeighborWorks Montana, I was pleased to see that Snowy Mountain was an education and counseling partner. The last time I saw Kathy was at a rural convening in Harleton hosted by the Montana Community Foundation. While I was inspired by the presenters and enjoyed connecting with colleagues over a plate of local barbecue, I have to say that getting to see Kathy and reconnect with her was one of the highlights of that trip. Her dedication, humility, openness, quick mind, and commitment to finding and implementing solutions for the community she loved were qualities that made an incredible impact. When I think of rural economic development and housing, I think of Kathy. She was among the best and will be deeply missed. We have posted the in memoriam page in the chat. If you have stories to share, there is a memorial page linked there, and we encourage you to share your stories. And there's also a link to the endowment that Kathy bequeathed to SMDC. I want to highlight for you what is to come in the conference today. Our first set of breakout sessions will start at 11 a.m., an hour long. And the second set of breakout sessions will start at 1 p.m. The 1 p.m. breakouts are 1-hour sessions followed by an additional 30 minutes of discussion. You can join for just the hour or stay for the full 90 minutes. We have structured a 30-minute break now and an hour break between the breakout sessions. This is to give you time to get up from your computers, stretch your legs, and come back refreshed for the next session. Each session has its own Zoom link, so please refer to the agenda within Whova to access sessions throughout the day. Remember the challenge Cheryl posed at the beginning of our session this morning. Ask a question, share a resource, and share your perspective. In the chat, remember to select all panelists and attendees so that everyone in your sessions can see what you post. Tomorrow morning, we hope that you will join us for the coffee talk starting at 8 a.m. This is a time to mingle and connect with other attendees. We will have randomly assigned 4-person small groups that will rotate every 10 minutes. If you are feeling a little out of practice with casual conference coffee talk, don't worry, you are not alone. There are some question suggestions in the coffee talk overview in Whova if you need help getting started. You can join at any time during the hour and participate for the full hour or just a short time. Then at 9 a.m. tomorrow, we will gather to recognize and celebrate this year's award winners, followed by a great morning plenary session on storytelling as a leadership tool presented by Sarah Elkins of Elkins Consulting. Again, all session information and links are in Whova. The easiest way to get the links is to click on the agenda on the navigation buttons on the left of the Whova conference homepage. Then scroll to the session you want to attend, click on View Session, and then join the live stream here. So go to that left bar and look at the agenda. And then for coffee talk in the morning, you can click on the network table from the menu on the Whova homepage and grab a seat. If you are looking for a great way to spend some of your break time today, nominate an organization or program for the People's Choice Award. If you haven't made a nomination yet, you can do so by using the SurveyMonkey link that was just posted in the chat. There are so many great projects and programs happening across the state. This year, we want to give you all a chance to nominate an organization or a program you admire. We will accept nominations throughout the conference today until 3 p.m. We have 37 nominees so far. You're seeing their logos on your screens. Tomorrow morning, the nominees will be displayed during our award ceremony, and we will do a live poll vote to select the People's Choice. The winner will receive $3,000 to support production of a video about their organization or program. Before you go, we have some great raffle prizes for attendees, and we want to draw for one name now. You do not have to be present to win, but we hope you will be. We will also draw names tomorrow during each of the plenary sessions. So we're going to pull up our wheel of names and give it a spin. Julie Hunter, you are our first raffle winner. We'll be in touch with you to get the prize out to you. Enjoy your breakout sessions today, everyone. Thanks again, and enjoy the conference today. Take care.